The red dust of Redemption Gulch had a way of getting into everything: boots, hair, lungs, and souls. It was the kind of dust that spoke of drought and desperation, clinging to the wooden buildings along Main Street like rust on old iron. The sun beat down mercilessly on the New Mexico territory that summer of 1881, turning the earth to powder and men's tempers to tinder. Jonah Hale squinted against the glare as his horse picked its way down the rocky trail toward town. After 3 weeks of driving cattle across the Badlands for the Circle H Ranch, his throat felt like he'd swallowed half the desert. The promise of whiskey and wages drew him forward, though neither held much appeal anymore. Not since Colorado. Not since the things he'd done wearing a Pinkerton badge. The town appeared like a mirage through the heat shimmer, a collection of weathered structures huddled against the base of Devil's Spine Ridge. That damn dam loomed above everything, its limestone face catching the afternoon sun like bleached bones. Jonah had heard the stories, how Silas Pike had built it 5 years back, claiming it would bring prosperity to all. Instead, it brought Pike control over every drop of water that flowed through the valley. As Jonah rode down Main Street, he noticed the usual signs of a town slowly dying of thirst. Women clustered around the community well, their faces drawn with worry as they waited their turn. Children played listlessly in the shade, their games interrupted by dry coughs. Even the horses at the hitching posts stood with heads low, conserving energy in the heat. "Water rations cut again," muttered an old-timer sitting on the general store porch. "Pike says the dam's running low." His companion spat tobacco juice into the dust.
"Dam's running low. My eye. That snake's just squeezing us tighter."
Jonah tied his horse outside the Silver Dollar Saloon and stepped inside, grateful for the relative cool of the dimly lit interior. The place was half empty, unusual for late afternoon when the miners typically crowded in. Those present huddled in small groups, their voices low and urgent. "You burned clean through," one man was saying.
"Nothing left but ash and char."
"The devil's work," another replied. "Mark my words, this town's cursed." Jonah ordered whiskey from the barkeep, a thin man named Curtis, who always looked like he'd tasted something sour. "What's this about a fire?" Curtis slid the glass across scarred wood. "Grain warehouse went up in flames last night. Whole winter's supply. Gone." He leaned closer, voice dropping. "Some say it weren't no accident." "Who's saying that?" The barkeep's eyes darted toward the door. "Nobody with sense. Not with Pike's men having such good hearing." Before Jonah could press further, the saloon doors banged open. Luther Pike swaggered in, flanked by 2 hired guns, where his older brother Silas ruled through calculated moves and careful words. Luther preferred the direct approach of intimidation. His hand never strayed far from the Colt on his hip. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Luther announced, his smile sharp as a blade. "Hope nobody's spreading false rumors about last night's unfortunate accident." His gaze swept the room, lingering on each face. "My brother would be mighty disappointed to hear of such ungrateful talk." The saloon fell silent. Men studied their drinks with sudden intensity. Luther's smile widened. He sauntered to the bar, deliberately shouldering past Jonah. "You're new," Luther observed, looking Jonah up and down. "One of McBride's boys from the Circle H?" "Just a hand earning wages," Jonah replied evenly. "Smart man, keeping your head down. Minding your business." Luther's eyes glittered with malice. "That's how folks stay healthy in Redemption Gulch." The implied threat hung in the air like smoke. Jonah simply nodded and turned back to his drink. He'd learned long ago that the best way to handle men like Luther was to become invisible, forgettable. Let them think you were nobody worth noticing. Luther ordered a bottle of the good stuff on the house, of course, and left with his men. Conversation slowly resumed, though more subdued than before. "There's gonna be trouble over this," Curtis muttered, polishing a glass with unusual vigor. "Folks are scared, and scared people do foolish things." "Like what?" Jonah asked. Like listening to that preacher. Curtis jerked his head toward the window. Through the dusty glass, Jonah could see a crowd gathering near the well. Reverend Coldwater's got them worked up about divine punishment and evil influences. Curious, despite himself, Jonah finished his drink and stepped outside. The crowd had grown, drawn by the preacher's booming voice. Ephraim Coldwater stood on a makeshift platform, his black coat buttoned despite the heat, his face flushed with righteous fervor. "The Lord has shown us his displeasure," Coldwater thundered. "First the drought, now the fire. These are signs, my friends, signs that we harbor evil in our midst." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. Jonah noticed how people leaned in, desperate for answers, for someone to blame. "There are those among us who practice dark arts," the preacher continued, "who corrupt our water with their heathen ways, who bring misfortune through their very presence." A woman pushed through the crowd, water buckets balanced on a wooden yoke across her shoulders. She kept her head down, a faded blue shawl hood pulled forward, but something in the way people recoiled from her caught Jonah's attention. Whispers followed her progress like rattlesnakes. "Devil's bride. Witch. She was there last night, near the warehouse." The woman girl, really, Jonah realized. Seeing her slender frame tried to reach the well, but the crowd pressed closer, blocking her path. Someone shoved her shoulder. The bucket swayed dangerously. "Show your face, witch." A drunk miner grabbed at her hood. "Let us see the devil's mark." The fabric tore away, and Jonah's breath caught. She was beautiful, striking in a way that made men stupid and women jealous. High cheekbones spoke of Mexican heritage, while green eyes hinted at Irish blood. But it was the scar that drew gasps from the crowd, a twisted mark running from her left ear down to her collar. The skin puckered and discolored from an old burn. "You see," Coldwater's voice rose in triumph, "marked by hellfire itself." The girl, Maggie Vega. Jonah had heard her called, stood straight despite the hostile stares. "I need water for my patients. Mrs. Morrison's baby has fever." "Your potions caused that fever," someone shouted. "My medicine saved her older boy from the same sickness last month," Maggie replied, her voice steady though her knuckles were white on the bucket handles. The drunk miner stepped closer, breath reeking of rot-gut whiskey. "Maybe you started the fire. Everybody knows you were gathering your devil weeds near the warehouse." "I was collecting willow bark for—" "Liar." The man raised his hand. Jonah moved without thinking. One moment he was at the crowd's edge. The next, he stood between Maggie and her attacker, his presence creating a wall of calm in the storm of anger. "The lady's just trying to get water," he said quietly. The miner's face twisted. "You defending this witch stranger?" "I'm defending basic decency." Jonah's hand didn't move toward his gun, but something in his stance made the miner step back. "Let her fill her buckets." Luther Pike's voice cut through the tension. Well, the new hand's got himself a soft spot for our local curse." He emerged from the crowd, that sharp smile in place. "Careful, cowboy. Her kind of beauty comes with a price. Ask anyone who's gotten too close." "I'll take my chances," Jonah replied. Luther laughed, but his eyes were cold. "Your funeral." He turned to address the crowd. "My brother wants everyone to know he's working on a solution to our problems. Both the water shortage and other unwelcome elements in our town. You have his word on that." The threat in those words was clear. The crowd began to disperse, though hostile glances continued to follow Maggie. She filled her buckets quickly, hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," she murmured to Jonah, not meeting his eyes. "You shouldn't travel alone," he said. "Where are you headed?" "The Mexican camp, then home." She adjusted the yoke on her shoulders. "I'll be fine." "I'll walk with you to the edge of town." She looked at him then, those green eyes searching his face. "You don't know me, Mr. Don't know what they say. I know what I just saw. That's enough." Something flickered across her features, surprise, maybe, or hope quickly suppressed. She nodded once. They walked in silence through streets that felt hostile despite being nearly empty. Curtains twitched as they passed. Faces appeared in windows, then vanished. Jonah found himself studying her from the corner of his eye, noting the careful grace with which she moved despite the heavy buckets, the way she held her head high despite everything. She was a beauty, he thought, the words coming unbidden, even with the whole town calling her a devil. He couldn't help wanting to pull her close, to shield her from their hatred. At the town's edge, where the buildings gave way to scrub brush and red rocks, she paused. This is far enough. My home's just past those boulders. The Vega place. I've heard of it. Her mouth tightened. I'm sure you have. My mother's land. Her water rights. She looked back toward town, toward the dam looming above. For whatever those are worth now. Your mother. Died 3 years ago. Dust storm caught her checking the old aquifer channels. Maggie's voice remained steady, but pain flickered in her eyes. She knew secrets about water in this desert. Pike wanted those secrets. Still does. A dust devil swirled across the path between them, carrying the scent of creosote and something burning. Maggie's nostrils flared. There'll be another fire, she said quietly. I can smell it on the wind. You saying someone's planning? I'm saying drought makes everything into kindling. Fear makes people into fools, and men like Pike know how to use both. She shifted the buckets. You should stay away from me, Mr. Jonah Hale. Mr. Hale, you seem decent. That's rare enough to be worth preserving. She walked away before he could respond, disappearing among the red rocks like a desert spirit. Jonah stood there longer than he should have, watching the spot where she'd vanished, feeling like something fundamental had shifted in his chest. By the time he returned to town, the sun was setting, painting the sky the color of blood and promises. The saloon was fuller now, voices louder, anger fermenting like bad beer. Jonah collected his pay from the Circle H foreman and found a corner table. But his thoughts kept drifting to green eyes and scarred skin, to the dignity in her bearing despite the town's cruelty. Near midnight, the bell above the general store began clanging. Men poured into the street, shouting. Orange light flickered against building faces. Fire. The church is burning. But when Jonah joined the bucket brigade, he saw it wasn't the church ablaze, it was the small shed behind it where Coldwater stored donated food for the poor. As flames consumed the last of the town's charity, the preacher stood in the street, still in his funeral black coat, pointing at the inferno. You see, you all see, this is what comes of tolerating evil. The witch's herbs were seen near here today. Her curse spreads like plague. Through the smoke and chaos, Jonah noticed Luther Pike watching from the shadows, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. When their eyes met, Luther touched his hat brim in mock salute. The message was clear. This was just the beginning. As the shed collapsed in a shower of sparks, Silas Pike himself appeared, flanked by well-armed men. The mine owner was everything his brother wasn't controlled. Calculating, speaking in measured tones that somehow carried more threat than Luther's bluster. My friends, Silas addressed the crowd. These troubles pain me deeply. First our grain, now our charity. It's clear we face a threat to our very survival. He paused, letting fear sink its hooks deeper. I propose we take steps to protect our community. The town council will meet tomorrow to discuss permanent solutions. His gaze found Coldwater, and something passed between them. The preacher nodded, clutching his Bible like a weapon. Including, Silas continued, the question of water rights held by those who may not have Redemption Gulch's best interests at heart. The crowd murmured approval. Jonah felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He'd seen this before, fear transformed into mob justice. Greed dressed up as righteousness. In Colorado, it had ended with dead miners and him washing blood from his hands that would never quite come clean. Not again, he promised himself. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't stand by and watch it happen again. The fire burned down to embers, but the real flames of hatred, suspicion, and calculated evil were just beginning to catch. And somewhere beyond the town's edge, past the red rocks and desert silence, a young woman with healing hands and a scarred face waited in her mother's house, knowing the storm was coming but refusing to run. Because Maggie Vega, like the desert plants she gathered, had deep roots, and deep roots, her mother had taught her, could survive even the harshest drought. The question was whether the same could be said for simple human decency in a town gone mad with thirst. The morning after the fire, Jonah found himself drawn back to the charred remains of the church shed. Dawn painted the destruction in shades of gray and regret. He wasn't the only one there. Deputy Cole Arnett stood among the ashes, his young face troubled as he sifted through debris with a stick. "Find anything?" Jonah asked. Cole, startled, then relaxed, seeing who it was. "Mr. Hale, yeah, I found something all right." He held up a fragment of glass. Its edges blackened, but the shape still recognizable. "Lamp oil bottle, same kind they use at the mine." "Interesting. That's one word for it." Cole glanced around nervously. "Look, I know you're new here, but you seem like a straight shooter. This fire, it weren't no accident. Neither was the warehouse." "You planning to tell anyone?" The deputy's laugh was bitter. "Tell who Mayor's in Pike's pocket. Half the town council, too." He kicked at a burned beam. "My PA was sheriff here for 20 years. Taught me the job was about protecting folks, not picking sides. But these days," he shook his head, "these days, I don't know what's right anymore." Before Jonah could respond, the thunder of hooves announced company. Luther Pike and 3 riders approached, their faces hard as the morning sun. "Deputy," Luther drawled, "my brother wants to know if you found evidence of arson." Cole's jaw tightened. "Still investigating." "Well, investigate faster. Town council meets at noon." Luther's gaze shifted to Jonah. "You're up early. Cowboy. Developing a habit of being where you shouldn't. Just curious about the fire. Seems to be a lot of that going around." Luther's hand drifted toward his gun. "Curiosity's dangerous in these parts. Ask the witch her mama was real curious about water. Look where it got her." The casual cruelty of the comment made Jonah's fists clench, but he kept his expression neutral. Luther smiled, satisfied, and wheeled his horse around. "Noon. Deputy, have answers, or my brother will find someone who does." After they left, Cole picked up the glass fragment again. "Senora Vega wasn't killed by no dust storm. Found her body myself, out by the old channels. Back of her head was caved in." "You report it." To whose sheriff back then was already bought. "Called it an accident. Case closed." Cole pocketed the evidence. "That girl Maggie, she knows the truth. Why do you think she stays? Could leave, start fresh somewhere. But she's protecting something." "The water?" "Her mama's secret. Location of an underground spring. Maybe, or the old Indian channels. Something Pike wants bad enough to—" Cole stopped, shaking his head. "I've said too much. You didn't hear none of this." Jonah watched the deputy walk away, shoulders bent under the weight of knowing too much and being able to do too little. He understood that burden. In Colorado, he'd carried similar knowledge, right up until the mining company decided to end the strike with bullets instead of negotiations. He'd known it was coming, had warned his superiors. They'd told him to follow orders. 27 miners died that day. Jonah had washed their blood from his hands, but the stain went deeper than skin. The sun climbed higher, baking the earth to hardpan. Jonah headed for the boarding house where he'd taken a room, intending to clean up before the town council spectacle. But as he passed the general store, he spotted Maggie emerging with a basket of supplies. She moved quickly, head down, trying to avoid notice. It didn't work. A group of women doing their morning shopping fell silent at her approach. One, the banker's wife, dressed in imported silk despite the heat, deliberately stepped into Maggie's path. Shopping for more poison, Mrs. Harriet Dalton's voice carried the particular venom reserved for woman-to-woman cruelty. Or perhaps ingredients for your next curse. Medical supplies, Maggie replied quietly. The Clayton boy has infection from a cut. The Clayton boy should see Doc Pembry, not some Mexican witch. Doc Pembry sent for me. He's out of carbolic acid, and I know how to make a substitute from your devil's garden, Harriet's friends tittered nervously. We know what grows there. Senora Martinez saw bones hanging from the trees. Those are deer bones. They keep rabbits from eating the tea. Bones for dark rituals. Harriet leaned closer, voice dropping to a hiss. Your mother fooled some people with her act, but we see through you. That scar tells the truth. Hell marked you, and hell will claim you. Maggie's composure finally cracked. My mother saved your daughter from scarlet fever. Have you forgotten? I've forgotten nothing, especially not the price she demanded. Harriet's face twisted. Water rights. Always about the water with your kind. Payment for medicine is hardly... Harriet's hand flashed out, knocking the basket from Maggie's arms. Glass vials shattered on the boardwalk, spreading precious medicines across the dusty wood. The women stepped back, as if the spilled liquids might contaminate them. Oops, Harriet said flatly. How clumsy of me. Maggie knelt to salvage what she could, hands shaking. Jonah stepped forward, but someone beat him to it. Nettie Ross, the boarding house owner, pushed through the crowd like a small force of nature. Harriet Dalton, you should be ashamed. Nettie's Scottish accent thickened with anger. Acting like gutter trash when you pretend to be quality. How dare you? I dare because I remember when your Amy lay dying, and Doc Pembry gave up hope, who sat by her bed for 3 days, who broke her fever. Nettie helped Maggie gather the unbroken vials. This girl and her blessed mother, that's who. That was before we knew what they really were. Harriet sputtered. What they are is healers. What you are is a fool. Nettie's glare could have melted iron. Get on with you, before I tell everyone about those letters from Dallas. You know the ones. Harriet went pale, then red. She gathered her skirts and fled, her coterie trailing behind. Nettie helped Maggie to her feet. Pay them no mind, dear. Small people need someone to look down on. Thank you, Maggie whispered. No thanks needed. Your mother birthed both my boys when everyone said I was too old. I don't forget kindness. Nettie noticed Jonah hovering nearby. Mr. Hale, make yourself useful. Help carry these supplies. It wasn't a request. Jonah gathered what could be saved while Nettie fussed over Maggie, straightening her shawl and patting her shoulder with rough affection. You'll come to my kitchen for tea, Nettie declared. No arguments. They made an odd procession through the hostile streets, the Scottish boarding house keeper, the scarred young healer, and the quiet cowboy carrying broken medicines. Nettie's boarding house sat on a side street, its windows adorned with crisp curtains that spoke of stubborn respectability. The kitchen was a haven of normalcy, herbs drying from the rafters, bread cooling on the windowsill, a kettle singing on the stove. Nettie bustled about while Maggie sat at the scrubbed table, looking younger than her years. Drink, Nettie ordered, setting down cups of strong tea. Both of you. You look like you've seen ghosts. Just the living, Maggie said softly. Sometimes they're worse. Nettie's expression softened. Your mother used to say the same thing. Brave woman. Esperanza Vega knew she was making enemies but stayed anyway. She believed in the promise, Maggie said. The one she made to the old people who showed her the water paths, that it would always flow for those in need. Jonah leaned forward. Old people. The mescalero who lived here before. Most moved on when the miners came, but a few elders remained. They taught my mother their knowledge before. She trailed off. Before the Indian troubles of 78 inches, Nettie finished grimly. Pike's men drove out the last of them, claimed they were stealing cattle. Really, they were in the way of the dam. My mother hid their sacred things. Maggie continued. Promised to guard the old water shrine. The channels they dug centuries ago still work, if you know how to read them. But if Pike ever found out, he'd dynamite the whole system to get at the water. Jonah said. Maggie nodded. So I stay. I keep her garden. I heal who I can. And I wait. For what? Her green eyes met his. For someone strong enough to stop him, or for the desert to reclaim us all. A commotion outside broke the moment. Through the window, they could see people hurrying toward the town hall. Noon had arrived, and with it, the council meeting. I should go, Maggie said, rising. You should stay hidden, Nettie countered. Nothing good will come of that gathering. I need to know what they're planning. Maggie pulled her shawl over her head. Thank you for the tea. She slipped out before Nettie could protest further. Jonah set down his cup. I'll keep an eye on her. Nettie studied him with sharp eyes. You're not just a cowhand, are you, Mr. Hale? Not always, no. Good. That girl needs more than sympathy. She needs someone who knows how men like Pike operate. Nettie's voice dropped. Her mother didn't die in a dust storm. Most of us know it but are too scared to say. Why did they kill her? Because she wouldn't sell, wouldn't trade water for silver. Said the water belonged to everyone, not just those who could afford it. Nettie's hands clenched around her apron. Pike tried everything: threats, bribes, even sent Luther to court her. Can you imagine that snake thinking he could win her with flowers? What happened? Esperanza laughed in his face, said she'd rather kiss a rattler. 2 weeks later, she was dead. Nettie's eyes glistened. Maggie found her, 16 years old, finding her mother with her skull broken. But did she run? No, stubborn as her mama. Jonah stood, checking his gun out of habit. I'll watch out for her at the meeting. You do that, and Mr. Hale. Nettie's voice stopped him at the door. I've seen how you look at her, how she looks at you. Be careful. Pike doesn't share, and he doesn't forget. The town hall overflowed with angry citizens. Jonah found a spot along the back wall where he could see everything. Maggie stood near the side door, half hidden in shadow. On the platform, the town council sat like judges at a trial. Mayor Hutchins, red-faced from drink despite the early hour. Silas Pike, cool and collected in his expensive suit. Reverend Coldwater, Bible clutched like a shield. Order! Hutchins banged his gavel. This emergency session is called to address the recent disasters plaguing our town. Disasters! A miner shouted from the crowd. You mean fires, suspicious fires? Yes. Well, that's one interpretation. It's arson, another voice. And we know who's behind it. Coldwater rose, raising his hands for silence. Brothers and sisters, we face more than mere crime. We face spiritual warfare. Evil walks among us, cloaked in beauty, spreading corruption. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Jonah saw Maggie tense. The signs are clear. Coldwater continued. Drought, fire, death. These are biblical plagues, brought by one who consorts with dark forces. Name her, someone shouted. Name the witch! Silas Pike stood, his presence commanding instant attention. Gentlemen, please, we are civilized people. We don't engage in witch hunts. His pause was perfectly timed. However, we must address certain irregularities in our community. He produced a document from his coat. I have here a petition, signed by concerned citizens, requesting the council examine the validity of certain water claims. Specifically, Those inherited through questionable means. You mean stolen by Mexican squatters? A voice from the crowd. I mean, Silas continued smoothly, claims that may not have been properly filed according to territorial law. If such claims are invalid, the water rights would revert to the town to be administered fairly. Of course. Jonah's jaw clenched. It was neat, legal-sounding theft, no mention of Maggie by name, but everyone knew whose water rights were in question. Furthermore, Silas continued, given recent events, I propose we establish a committee for public safety, empowered to investigate threats to our community and take appropriate action, including confiscation of dangerous materials. Coldwater added, herbs and potions used for unholy purposes. Now wait a minute, Deputy Cole had found his voice. You can't just seize people's property without cause. Luther Pike stepped from behind his brother's chair. Can't we, Deputy, when the safety of the whole town is at stake? The law serves the people, Silas interrupted smoothly. And the people are afraid. They want protection. From what a young woman who helps birth babies and heal sick kids. The words burst from Jonah before he could stop them. Every head turned. He stepped forward, ignoring the hostile stares. I'm new here, he continued. But I've got eyes. I see who's suffering and who's profiting. Miss Vega helps folks who can't afford the doctor. How's that a crime? And who are you to speak? Coldwater demanded. Someone who's seen this before. Fear turned into a weapon, usually by those who profit from it. Silas Pike's eyes narrowed. You sound like a man with experience in such matters. Mr. Hale, Jonah Hale. He met Pike's gaze steadily. And yeah, I've got experience. Enough to recognize a setup when I see one. Interesting. Silas's smile was thin as a blade. Well, Mr. Hale, since you're so concerned with justice, perhaps you'd like to know that we have evidence linking Miss Vega to the recent fires. He produced another paper. A witness saw her near both locations shortly before the flames started. Strange herbs were found, herbs known to be highly flammable when prepared certain ways. That's a lie. Maggie stepped from the shadows. I was treating patients, Mrs. Morrison's baby. Then old Jim Fletcher's breathing troubles. They can verify. The testimony of those bewitched holds no weight, Coldwater interjected. Then what about mine? Doc Pembry's voice came from the doorway. The elderly physician entered, leaning on his cane but radiating authority. I sent for Miss Vega both times. She was assisting me when those fires started. Doctor, Silas's voice held a warning. You're respected here. Don't throw that away defending a skilled healer who's saved more lives than half the doctors in the territory. Pembry's cane thumped the floor. Yes, I'll defend her. Just as her mother defended this town's children from scarlet fever, diphtheria, and Lord knows what else. Her mother was a witch, someone shouted. Her mother was a midwife trained by the Sisters of Mercy in Santa Fe. Pembry shot back. I've seen her certificates. The crowd stirred uneasily. Facts were inconvenient things when fear felt so much simpler. Silas raised a hand. Regardless of past services, we must deal with present threats. I call for a vote, all in favor of establishing the Committee for Public Safety. 3 hands rose: Silas, Coldwater, and Hutchins. All opposed. 2 hands: Doc Pembry and, surprisingly, the elderly storekeeper, Josiah Finch. Motion passes. Silas's satisfaction was evident. The committee will begin investigations immediately. For public safety, Miss Vega is hereby ordered to surrender all herbs, potions, and medical materials for inspection. Deputy Arnett will oversee the collection. I won't do it, Cole said flatly. Luther's hand moved to his gun. You refusing a lawful order. Deputy. The tension stretched taut. Jonah shifted, ready to intervene, but Maggie spoke first. I'll comply. Her voice was steady despite the tears threatening her eyes. "But people will die without those medicines." "The Lord will provide for the righteous." Coldwater intoned. "The Lord helps those who help themselves," Doc Pembry snapped. "And right now, he's helping Pike steal water rights through legal trickery." "That's enough." Hutchins banged his gavel. "Meeting adjourned. Miss Vega, you have until sunset to deliver your, materials to the sheriff's office." The crowd began dispersing. Voices raised in argument and accusation. Jonah pushed through to Maggie's side. "Don't give them anything. We'll find another way." She looked at him, exhaustion written on her face. "There is no other way. If I resist, they'll use it as excuse for worse." Her hand briefly touched his arm. "But thank you for speaking up. No one's done that in a long time." "Maggie, dear, come away." Nettie appeared, wrapping a protective arm around the younger woman. "You'll stay with me tonight." As they moved toward the door, Luther Pike blocked their path. "Going somewhere, ladies." "Step aside, Luther," Nettie commanded. "Or what you'll scold me." He leered at Maggie. "You know, you could end all this trouble. My brother's a reasonable man. Make a deal, share those water secrets, and this all goes away." "I'd rather die," Maggie said quietly. Luther's face darkened. "That can be arranged." Jonah's fist connected with Luther's jaw before anyone saw him move. The younger Pike went down hard, scattering chairs. His men reached for their guns, but Jonah already had his Colt drawn. "Anyone else want to threaten women today?" Luther struggled up, spitting blood. "You're dead, cowboy. You just don't know it yet." "Get in line," Jonah replied. Silas Pike's voice cut through the tension. "Luther, enough, Mr. Hale. I suggest you remember that violence has consequences." "So does stealing," Jonah countered. "So does murder." The brothers exchanged glances. Silas's smile was winter cold. "Be very careful, Mr. Hale. Very careful indeed." They left, Luther still nursing his jaw. The remaining crowd scattered, unwilling to be associated with either side. Nettie hustled Maggie away, but not before the young woman looked back at Jonah. "Why?" she asked simply. He thought of Colorado, of standing by while innocent people suffered, of washing blood from hands that had followed orders instead of conscience. "Because someone has to," he said. She nodded, understanding more than he'd said. Then she was gone, leaving Jonah alone with the certainty that he'd just painted a target on his back. But for the first time in 3 years, he felt clean. Deputy Cole approached, badge glinting in the afternoon sun. "That was either brave or stupid." "Probably both." "Yeah." Cole studied the street where the Pike brothers had disappeared. "You know they'll come for you." "I know. I can't protect you, not openly. Not asking you to." Cole nodded slowly. "But maybe I can forget to lock certain doors, or misplace certain confiscated items." He walked away without waiting for a response. As shadows lengthened across Redemption Gulch, Jonah made his preparations, checked his weapons, moved his few belongings from the boarding house to a less obvious location, sent word to Zeke at the Circle H that he might need backup. The sun set like a promise of blood, and somewhere in the growing darkness, a young woman surrendered her healing herbs to men who called her witch, but she didn't surrender her mother's secrets. Those remained locked in her heart, protected by love and loss and the kind of courage that blooms in the desert. The water wars of Redemption Gulch had begun in earnest, and Jonah Hale, failed Pinkerton, broken gunman, had chosen his side at last. He'd stood with power before. This time, he'd stand with what was right, even if it killed him. The moon hung like a silver peso over Devil's Spine Dam, casting long shadows across the limestone face. Jonah moved through the darkness with practiced stealth, Zeke Ortega beside him. They'd left their horses a quarter-mile back, approaching on foot through the maze of rocks and scrub brush. "You sure about this?" Zeke whispered. The Mexican vaquero had ridden with Jonah for 6 months at the Circle H, long enough to trust him, but not long enough to stop questioning his judgment. "Cole said the guards change shift at midnight. We've got maybe 20 minutes to see what Pike's hiding up here." They crept closer, using the scattered equipment sheds for cover. The dam loomed above them, a monument to one man's greed dressed up as progress. Water trickled from the base, barely enough to fill a horse trough, though tons of water pressed against the structure. "Mira," Zeke pointed. "Over there." 2 men worked by lantern light near a cluster of pipes, their voices carrying in the still air. Should be getting hazard pay for this." One grumbled, "Sneaking around in the dark like thieves." "We are thieves, you fool." His partner replied, "Just the legal kind. Now help me with this valve." Jonah and Zeke exchanged glances. They crept closer, finding cover behind a stack of timber. From there, they could see everything, a complex system of pipes and valves hidden beneath wooden platforms, designed to look like overflow channels but clearly serving another purpose. The workers opened a valve, and water gushed through the pipes not toward the town below, but laterally, following the hillside toward the mine operations. "That's the 3rd diversion tonight," the first man said. "Boss wants the lower reservoir topped off before the shortage gets announced tomorrow." "Shortage?" his partner snorted. "With the spring runoff, this dam's fuller than it's been in 2 years. But let the town folk think different." "Right. Long as we get paid, though I still say it's risky. That deputy's been sniffing around." "Cole Arnett, he's nothing. It's that new fellow, Hale, got Luther worried. Man's got the look of a professional gun." "Then maybe we should—" A coyote howled in the distance, cutting off the conversation. Both men tensed, hands moving to their weapons. Jonah held his breath, but after a moment, they relaxed. "Just wildlife. Come on, let's finish and get out of here. This place gives me the creeps at night." They closed the valves, covered their tracks, and headed down the maintenance road. Jonah waited until their lantern disappeared before emerging from cover. "Hee-ho de—" Zeke examined the pipe system. "They're stealing their own water and selling it back to the people." "Worse than that." Jonah studied the configuration. "See these stress cracks in the limestone? All this extra pressure. Diverted flow, it's weakening the dam's foundation." "You're saying—" "I'm saying Pike's greed might bring the whole thing down. And when it does—" Jonah looked toward the town nestled in the valley below. Redemption Gulch becomes Redemption Lake. They documented what they could, Zeke sketching the pipe layout while Jonah examined the structural damage. The eastern buttress showed signs of settling, hairline cracks spreading like spider webs through the stone. "We need Doc Pembry to see this," Jonah said. "He mentioned he had engineering training before he took up medicine. First, we need to get off this dam without getting shot." Zeke countered, "Company coming." Lanterns bobbed up the access road, too many to be the regular guards. Jonah and Zeke melted back into the shadows, working their way around the dam's edge. They'd almost reached their escape route when a familiar voice froze them in place. "Spread out, they're here somewhere." Luther Pike, leading a group of armed men. Somehow he'd known they'd be here tonight. "Barnes, take your men along the eastern approach. Martinez, check the pump houses. They don't leave this dam alive." Jonah touched Zeke's shoulder, pointed toward a drainage culvert. They slipped inside just as lanterns swept the area they'd vacated. The culvert was tight, barely wide enough for a man's shoulders, but it led away from the dam. They crawled through darkness and seepage water, listening to shouts and footsteps echo above. After what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, they emerged near their horses. "That was too close," Zeke muttered as they rode hard for town. "How'd Pike know?" "Someone talked, or we were followed." Jonah's mind raced through possibilities. "Either way, we've got bigger problems. We need to warn people about that dam." They reached town as the eastern sky lightened. Despite the early hour, a crowd had gathered near the well. Women with empty buckets, children clinging to their skirts, men with faces dark as thunderclouds. "What do you mean, reduced rations?" a miner's wife demanded. Mayor Hutchins, flanked by Pike's men, held up his hands. "The dam levels are critically low. Until the situation improves, each household gets 1 bucket per day. 1 bucket for cooking, cleaning, drinking." "It's temporary," Hutchins insisted, though his bloodshot eyes suggested he didn't believe it himself. "Mister, Pike assures nothing." An elderly Mexican woman pushed forward. "My grandson is sick with fever. He needs water." "Then perhaps you should have thought of that before harboring the witch." Coldwater's voice cut through the crowd. The preacher emerged from the shadows, Bible in hand. "Divine punishment falls on those who consort with evil." Jonah noticed Maggie then, standing at the crowd's edge with Nettie. Her face was pale but composed, though he could see the toll the previous day had taken. Without her herbs and medicines, she was helpless to aid those calling her witch. "This is about money, not God." Doc Pembry's voice rang out. The old physician pushed through the crowd, cane clicking on cobblestones. "I've lived here 30 years. Never seen the dam this full after spring runoff." The evidence suggests otherwise. Silas Pike appeared, immaculate despite the early hour. "My engineers report structural concerns. We must conserve water to prevent catastrophic failure." "Your engineers?" Pembry spat. "The same ones who built that death trap in the first place." "Careful, doctor. Slander is actionable." "So is murder," Jonah said, stepping into view. The crowd parted, creating a corridor between him and the Pike brothers. Luther's hand dropped to his gun, face still bruised from their last encounter. "Mr. Hale," Silas said smoothly, "you seem to appear wherever trouble starts." "Funny, I was thinking the same about you and your brother." Jonah kept his voice casual, but his stance was ready. "Interesting operation you've got up at the dam, all those pipes and valves." Luther went rigid. Silas's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "I'm not sure what you mean," Silas said. "Don't you? Maybe Deputy Arnett should take a look. Bring some witnesses." Jonah raised his voice so the crowd could hear. "See where their water's really going." Murmurs rippled through the gathering. People pressed closer, anger shifting focus. "That's a serious accusation," Silas said. "I hope you have proof." "Enough talking." Luther stepped forward, coat pushed back to show his gun. "This saddle tramp's stirring up trouble. Time someone shut his mouth permanent." "Luther," Silas warned, but his brother was past listening. "Draw, Hale. Let's settle this like men." The crowd scrambled back. Women pulled children behind water barrels. Men pressed against building walls. In the sudden space, 2 gunmen faced each other as the sun cleared the horizon. "I'm not looking for a fight," Jonah said. "Too bad. You found one." Luther's hand hovered over his Colt. "Unless you're yellow. That it. Pinkerton lost your nerve when you got all those miners killed." The words hit like a physical blow. Jonah saw surprise on faces around him, including Maggie's, his past, thrown out like a weapon. "That's right," Luther pressed on. "We know all about you. Jonah Hale, Pinkerton detective, led the strikebreakers in Colorado. How many died?" "Hale, 2030. 27, Jonah said quietly. "Their names were—" "Nobody cares about their names." Luther's voice rose. "Just like nobody'll care about yours when—" He went for his gun, fast, but not fast enough. Jonah's coat cleared leather and spoke once. Luther's weapon spun from his hand as he clutched his wrist, blood seeping between his fingers. "You shot me!" Luther's voice climbed to a shriek. "He shot me!" "You'll live," Jonah said, already holstering his weapon. More than those miners in Colorado can say. He turned to the crowd, seeing fear, suspicion, and uncertainty in their faces. Yeah, I was a Pinkerton. Yeah, I followed orders that got innocent men killed. That's why I'm here now, to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Pretty words,
Someone shouted.
but you're still a company gun.
Was, Jonah corrected. Until I saw what company guns do to folks just trying to survive. Ask yourself why Pike dug up my past. What's he afraid I might tell you? Enough. Silas's composure finally cracked. Marshal Wellman. A man Jonah hadn't noticed stepped from the crowd, tall, lean, wearing a federal badge. Mr. Hale, you're under arrest for assault. Since when is self-defense assault? Cole Arnett pushed forward. I saw the whole thing. Luther drew first. That's not how Mr. Pike tells it, Wellman said. His dead eyes never left Jonah. You come in peaceful, or do we do this hard? Jonah evaluated his options. Wellman had the look of a killer, badge or no badge. Fighting would only give Pike what he wanted, an excuse to gun him down legal. I'll come, he said. But Deputy Arnett takes my gun, not you. Wellman shrugged. Makes no difference to me. As Cole stepped forward to disarm him, Jonah caught sight of Maggie. She'd moved closer during the confrontation and now stood just feet away. Their eyes met. Find Zeke, he said quietly. Tell him to show Doc what we found. She nodded, understanding more than he'd said. Then Wellman was pushing him toward the jail, and the crowd was dispersing, and the sun was climbing toward another scorching day in Redemption Gulch. The jail was a squat adobe building with 2 cells and a front office that smelled of tobacco and sweat. Wellman locked Jonah in the smaller cell, then settled behind the desk with his feet up. Federal marshal, Jonah observed. Must be nice, having one on the payroll. Wellman smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. I go where I'm needed. Right now, Mr. Pike needs me here. To do what his killing for him. Among other things, Wellman pulled out a pocket watch, checked it. You've got maybe 6 hours. Make peace with whatever god you favor. That legal these days, murdering prisoners? Who said anything about murder dangerous man like you? That Pinkerton training might try to escape. Tragic, really. But these things happen. The front door opened before Jonah could respond. He expected Pike, but instead Doc Pembry entered, followed by Maggie and a nervous-looking Cole. I'm here to examine the prisoner, Pembry announced. That hand needs looking at. He ain't hurt, Wellman said. I'll be the judge of that. Deputy Arnett, I'll need assistance. Cole looked between Pembry and Wellman, then made his choice. Whatever you need. Doc. Wellman's eyes narrowed, but he couldn't openly refuse medical treatment. 5 minutes. They crowded into the cell area, while Pembry made a show of examining Jonah's perfectly healthy hand. Maggie pressed close to the bars. Zeke showed us, she whispered. The pipes, the diversions. It's worse than you thought. The dam? Doc says the eastern buttress could fail within days, maybe hours if we get rain. Storm coming in from the west, Pembry added quietly, still pantomiming medical treatment. Monsoon season's early this year. You need to warn the town, Jonah said urgently. With what proof your word against Pike's? Cole shook his head. Nobody'll listen. They'll listen when that dam comes down. Too late then, Pembry said. He pressed something into Jonah's hand, a small folding knife. For what it's worth, I believe you about Colorado. Man carrying that much guilt wouldn't lie about it. Time's up, Wellman called. Everyone out. As they filed past, Maggie touched Jonah's hand through the bars. Don't give up. We'll find a way. Just keep yourself safe, he told her. When this goes bad, and it will, Pike will look for someone to blame. She smiled sadly. He's been blaming me since the day I was born. At least now I'm not facing him alone. After they left, Jonah examined his cell. Adobe walls, iron bars, a barred window too small to squeeze through. The knife Pembry had passed him was sharp, but too small for serious work. Still, it was something. He settled on the narrow bunk to wait and plan. Outside, he could hear the normal sounds of town life: horses, wagons, conversations. But underneath ran a current of tension, like the air before lightning strikes. 2 hours passed, then 3. The sun climbed toward its zenith, turning the cell into an oven. Jonah dozed fitfully, conserving energy for whatever came next. He woke to arguing voices outside. No authority here, Cole Arnett, angry and scared. Federal badge says different, deputy. Wellman's voice, cold as winter. Stand aside. At least wait until dark. Broad daylight. Makes it easier to claim he was escaping. Now move, or I'll arrest you for obstruction. The door opened. Wellman entered. Gun drawn, hammer cocked. On your feet. Hail, time to try your luck. Jonah stood slowly, hands visible. The folding knife was concealed in his boot, but against a drawn gun, it might as well be in Mexico. Turn around, hands behind your back. This is murder. Wellman, you know it. I know it. The whole town'll know it. The whole town wants you gone. Pinkerton killer stirring up trouble. They'll probably thank me. Wellman produced shackles. Now turn around, or I'll shoot you where you stand. Jonah turned. Mind racing, once shackled. He was dead. The knife was his only chance, but he'd need a distraction. It came from an unexpected source. Marshal Wellman. Nettie Ross's voice rang out. You open this door right now. Office is closed, ma'am. I don't care if it's Judgment Day. That's my property in there, and I want it back. Your property? Mr. Hale owes 3 days' room and board. I'm filing a claim before he's run out of town. Wellman cursed under his breath. Wait there. He backed toward the door, keeping his gun on Jonah. Don't move. The moment Wellman turned to deal with Nettie, Jonah dropped to one knee, grabbed the knife, and came up throwing. The blade caught Wellman in the gun arm. He cursed, weapon dropping, and Jonah was on him. They crashed into the desk, scattering papers. Wellman was tough, fighting dirty despite his wounded arm. They rolled across the floor, each struggling for advantage. Jonah finally got position, arm around Wellman's throat. The marshal bucked and thrashed, but Jonah held on until he went limp unconscious. Not dead. He'd had enough of killing. Lord have mercy, Nettie breathed from the doorway. Behind her stood Cole, Zeke, and 6 townspeople. Is he alive? Jonah panted, retrieving his gun from Cole. But Pike'll send more. We need to move. The storm's here. Zeke pointed outside. Black clouds boiled over the mountains, lightning flickering in their depths. If that dam's really compromised, it is. Doc Pembry pushed through the crowd. I've run the calculations. That much water hitting those cracks. He shook his head. We need to evacuate the lower town. Nobody'll believe us, Cole said. Not without proof. Then we get proof. Jonah decided. Zeke, you and Pembry start warning whoever'll listen. Move them to high ground. Nettie, can you organize the women, children, and elderly first? What'll you do? Maggie asked. Jonah checked his weapons. What I should have done from the start. Take this fight to Pike. You can't face them alone. Not planning to. He looked at Cole. You said you wanted to be the lawman your father was. Here's your chance. Cole straightened, touching his badge. What do you need? Thunder rolled across the valley as Jonah outlined his plan. It was desperate, probably suicidal, but it was all they had. As the first fat raindrops began to fall, the group scattered to their tasks. Maggie caught Jonah's arm as he turned to go. That dam breaks. My mother's spring will be buried under tons of rock. Everything she protected. Gone. Not everything, Jonah said. You're still here. That knowledge is still alive. She studied his face. Why do you care really, not just about the town, but about this? He thought of Colorado again, of standing in the rain watching bodies carried from the mine, of the moment he'd realized that following orders wasn't the same as doing right. Because someone has to, he said simply. And because, he stopped, words catching. Because you were a beauty, he said softly. Even with the whole town calling you a devil, I couldn't help pulling you close. Still can't. She rose on her toes and kissed him, quick and fierce. Don't you dare die on me. Jonah Hale, we've got water to save and a town to rebuild. Then she was gone, running through the increasing rain toward the Mexican Quarter to spread the warning. Jonah watched her go, then turned toward the storm and the dam and whatever fate waited in the tempest. The water wars had become a race against time and nature, and somewhere above. Devil's Spine Dam groaned under the weight of greed and gathering rain, counting down to catastrophe. The church bell tolled like a death knell as the crowd filed into Redemption Gulch's largest building. What Reverend Coldwater had termed a moral tribunal was nothing more than a witch trial dressed in modern clothes. Rain drummed against the windows, each drop a reminder of the storm gathering strength outside. Jonah stood at the back, Cole Arnett beside him. They'd arrived to find the church transformed into a courtroom, with Pike's men stationed at every exit. The altar had been pushed aside to make room for a raised platform where Silas Pike, Coldwater, and Mayor Hutchins sat like inquisitors. Where is she? Jonah muttered, scanning the crowd. They're bringing her. Cole replied grimly. Saw Luther's boys collect her from Nettie's place an hour ago. The side door opened, and Maggie entered flanked by guards. They'd made her remove her shawl, exposing the scar that twisted down her neck. Her hands were bound before her, head held high despite the hostile stares. Women pulled their children closer as she passed. Men made signs against evil. Magdalena Vega. Coldwater intoned, rising from his seat. You stand accused of witchcraft, arson, and conspiracy against this Christian community. How do you answer? I answer that you're a fraud, Maggie said clearly. Using God's name to steal water rights. Gasps echoed through the church. Coldwater's face darkened. Blasphemy, you see how the devil speaks through her? Let her talk. Someone called out Doc Pembry, seated with the other town elders. Accused has a right to speak. The devil has no rights in God's house, Coldwater countered, but Silas raised a calming hand. We are civilized people. Reverend, Miss Vega may present her defense. His smile was thin as paper. Though I doubt it will change the evidence against her. What evidence? Maggie demanded. Herbs hanging to dry knowledge passed from mother to daughter. Since when are these crimes? Since they're used for dark purposes. Silas produced a leather journal. This was found in your home, your mother's writing. Shall I read some entries? Without waiting for permission, he opened the journal. The old ones showed me the hidden ways. Water sings beneath the stone, waiting for those who know the words. Pagan nonsense. That's about the underground channels. I have made the promise. The water will flow for all, not just those who can pay. Your mother's defiance of lawful commerce. Water is life, not commodity. And here, Silas's voice dropped dramatically. I fear for my daughter. She has the gift, but also the burden. They will hate her as they hate me. Because you killed her, the words erupted from Maggie. 3 years ago, when she wouldn't sell, you murdered her and called it an accident. Luther Pike lurched to his feet, wounded arm in a sling. Lying witch, my brother never... Your brother ordered it, and you carried it out. Maggie's green eyes blazed. I found the blood on the rocks, saw the hoofprints of your horse. Accusations without proof. Silas said smoothly. The desperate lies of the guilty. Then let's discuss proof. Jonah called out, stepping forward. Like the proof Deputy Arnett found at both fire sites, lamp oil from Pike's own mine stores. All heads turned. Cole moved to join Jonah, hand resting on his gun. It's true. Same batch numbers on the bottles. Someone using mine supplies set those fires. Deputy! Mayor Hutchins spluttered. You work for this town. I work for the law. Cole replied, and the law says evidence matters more than accusations. Evidence can be manufactured. Silas countered. Just as this entire defense is manufactured, Mr. Hale, a known killer, suddenly appears to defend our local witch. How convenient. What's convenient is using fear to steal water rights. Jonah said, Tell them about the dam. Pike, tell them what your greed is about to cost them. Thunder crashed overhead, as if emphasizing his words. Several people glanced nervously at the windows where rain sheeted down. The dam is perfectly sound. The dam is cracked. Doc Pembry stood, cane thumping the floor. I've seen it myself. The eastern buttress is failing. This storm will bring it down. More lies. Coldwater declared, Satan's servant spreading panic. His words were drowned by a sound like the earth tearing open. The church floor trembled. Hymn books tumbled from pews. Women screamed. What was that? Hutchins had gone pale. Through the rain-lashed windows, they could see lanterns dancing on the hillside like fireflies. Then a rider burst through the church doors, soaked and mud-splattered. The dam, he shouted. The dam's giving way. Water's coming down the mountain. Chaos erupted. People surged toward the exits, Pike's guards forgotten in the panic. Jonah fought through the crowd to Maggie, using his knife to cut her bonds. We need to get to high ground, he said. Not yet. She gripped his arm. My mother's journal, Pike still has it. It contains the locations of all the water sources. We can't let him. A gunshot split the air. The crowd froze. Luther Pike stood on the platform, smoking pistol raised. Nobody leaves, he snarled. This is a trick. There's nothing wrong with the dam. Another rumble, deeper this time. Dust sifted from the ceiling. Through the windows, they could see a dark wall advancing down the valley, not just water, but a churning mass of mud, rocks, and debris. You fool! Silas breathed, real fear cracking his composure for the first time. You've killed us all. The bell tower, Maggie shouted. Everyone to the bell tower, it's the highest point. The crowd surged again, but with purpose now. Men lifted children overhead, passing them hand to hand toward the narrow stairs. Women helped the elderly. In disaster, the artificial divisions crumbled. Jonah spotted Pike stuffing papers, including the journal, into a satchel. Going somewhere? Pike's hand went for his gun, but Jonah was already moving. They collided, crashing into abandoned pews. The satchel flew from Pike's grasp, contents scattering. You ruined everything, Pike snarled, fighting with desperate strength. Years of planning. Years of theft, Jonah corrected, landing a solid punch. Years of murder. They rolled across the floor as water began seeping under the doors. The church groaned on its foundations. Luther Pike appeared above them, gun aimed at Jonah's head. Goodbye, Pinkerton. Maggie swung a brass candlestick with all her strength. It connected with Luther's skull with a sound like a bell ringing. He collapsed in a heap. We're even, she said to Jonah, helping him up. He grabbed the journal while she gathered what papers she could. The water was ankle-deep now and rising fast. Most of the crowd had made it to the tower, but screams came from those trapped behind. The side door's blocked, Cole shouted. He and Zeke were trying to force it open against the water pressure. There's kids back here. Jonah added his strength to theirs. The door budged, then burst inward with a torrent of muddy water. A Mexican woman thrust two children at them before being swept away by the current.
Mama!
the older child screamed. I've got them. Nettie appeared, gathering the children. Go help others. They worked frantically, pulling people from the rising water, passing them toward the tower stairs. Coldwater stood frozen on his platform, Bible clutched to his chest, mumbling prayers. The water swirled around his knees, then his waist.
Reverend?
Maggie waded toward him. Take my hand. He looked at her with wild eyes. No, I won't be saved by a witch God will protect. A massive timber, part of someone's home, smashed through the window. It caught Coldwater across the middle, dragging him into the churning darkness. His scream cut off abruptly. Leave him! Jonah pulled Maggie back. He made his choice. They fought their way to the tower stairs as the water reached chest height. The ancient timbers groaned ominously. Behind them, something large struck the church's foundation. Stones ground together like giant teeth. The whole building's going, Zeke shouted from above. Move! They climbed, water lapping at their heels. The narrow stairs were clogged with desperate people. Children cried, adults prayed, and always, the water rose. Halfway up, they found Silas Pike blocking the way. Satchel clutched to his chest. Let me pass, he demanded. I have money I'll pay. Your money's worthless now. An old miner said, move or be moved. Pike pulled a derringer from his coat. I said, Jonah's fist connected before Pike could finish. The mine owner tumbled backward down the water-filled stairs, his screams swallowed by the flood. The satchel remained, caught on a protruding nail. Take it, Jonah told Maggie. Your mother's legacy. She clutched the bag as they continued climbing. The bell tower swayed like a ship's mast in a storm. Through the openings, they could see Devastation Home swept away. The Silver Dollar Saloon collapsed. Main Street transformed into a raging river. There, Cole pointed. The dam. In the lightning flashes, they could see Devil's Spine Dam, or what remained of it. The eastern section had vanished, leaving a gap like a missing tooth. Water poured through in an endless cascade, carrying away 5 years of greed and lies. How long will the tower hold? Someone asked. Long enough, Maggie said firmly. It stood for 50 years. It'll stand tonight. But even as she spoke, a grinding sound came from below. The church's main structure was separating from the tower. Timbers snapped like gunshots. Everyone to this side, Jonah ordered. Balance the weight. They huddled together townspeople who hours before had been ready to hang Maggie as a witch. Harriet Dalton clutched her children next to the woman she'd scorned. Miners pressed against merchants. In the face of nature's fury, hatred seemed petty. Look, a child pointed through the rain. Lights approached from the higher ground lanterns and torches carried by those who'd heeded the early warnings. Ropes sailed through the air, securing the tower to more stable structures. A human chain formed, ready to pull survivors to safety. Women and children first. Jonah organized the evacuation. Slowly, don't overload the ropes. One by one, people crossed the churning water. Harriet Dalton paused before Maggie. I was wrong. Can you forgive? Go, Maggie said gently. Your children need you. As the tower emptied, its swaying increased. Only a handful remained: Jonah, Maggie, Cole, Zeke, and surprisingly, Mayor Hutchins. Why didn't you go? Cole asked the mayor. Hutchins laughed bitterly. Where I sold my soul to Pike, let the town burn. Maybe it's time I paid. Dying won't help. Jonah said, living my town'll need leadership, real leadership. From a drunk who? From a man who understands the cost of bad choices. Maggie interrupted. My mother used to say redemption was always possible, even in a place called Redemption Gulch. Hutchins stared at her, then slowly nodded. Your mother was a wise woman. I'm sorry for everything. Another support beam cracked. The tower lurched sickeningly. Philosophy later, Zeke shouted. Move now! They crossed the ropes one at a time, water clutching at them like liquid hands. Jonah went last, the tower collapsing into the flood just as his feet touched solid ground. They stood on the hillside, watching their town disappear beneath the waters. The general store, the jail, the saloon all gone, but the people survived, huddled together under whatever shelter they could find. What now? Cole asked quietly. Now we rebuild, Maggie said. She opened her mother's journal, pages miraculously intact. The old waterways are here. Springs, channels, aquifers, enough for everyone, if we're smart about it. No more hoarding, Hutchins added. No more using thirst as a weapon. Pretty words, someone said, but who'll lead, who'll make sure it's different this time? We will, Jonah said. All of us, together. Dawn broke gray and watery, revealing the full extent of destruction. The lower town was gone, but the desert remained. And in the desert, as Maggie's mother had known, water always finds a way. In the ruins of the church, they found Luther Pike's body. Silas was never recovered, swept away with his dreams of empire. Marshal Wellman had fled in the night, badge abandoned in the mud. You'll stay, Maggie asked Jonah as they stood overlooking the changed landscape. He thought of Colorado, of the guilt that had driven him here. Then he looked at the survivors already planning their new town, free from Pike's stranglehold. Someone needs to make sure the new dam is built right, he said, and the water flows fair. That's not an answer. He turned to her, this woman who'd been called devil and witch, who'd stood against a town's hatred with grace and courage. She was a beauty, he said softly. Even when the whole town called her a devil, I couldn't help pulling her close. The town doesn't call me that anymore. No, he agreed, taking her hands. Now they call you hero. But I still want to pull you close. She smiled, green eyes bright with tears and hope. Then stay. Help me honor my mother's promise. Help me make water flow for all. He kissed her as the sun broke through the clouds, painting the wet desert in shades of gold and possibility. Below them, voices rose not in anger or fear, but in determination. The old Redemption Gulch had washed away. What rose from the mud would be something new, something better. And in Maggie's mother's journal, pressed between pages of water wisdom and healing herbs, they found a note. When the old ways fail, new ways are born. Like water, love finds its level. Trust the desert. Trust each other. The rest will follow. Looking out over their broken, brave town, Jonah and Maggie believed it might just be true. The desert had a way of hiding places that didn't want to be found. Arroyo Seco was one such refuge, a narrow canyon carved by ancient waters, where cottonwoods grew thick along a hidden spring, and the walls provided shelter from both sun and searching eyes. Jonah had discovered it years ago while tracking rustlers. Now it became their sanctuary. They'd fled Redemption Gulch as dawn painted the sky crimson, knowing Luther Pike's surviving men would come hunting. Maggie rode behind Jonah on his horse, her arms tight around his waist, her mother's journal secured in a leather pouch. The flood had changed everything, washing away the old power structure along with half the town. But violent men rarely accepted defeat gracefully. There, Jonah pointed to what looked like solid rock face. Trust me. He guided the horse into a narrow crack barely wide enough for them to pass. The passage twisted, walls pressing close, before suddenly opening into a green oasis. Water trickled over moss-covered stones into a clear pool. Desert willows drooped their branches like curtains. It's beautiful, Maggie breathed, sliding from the horse. How did you... Found it chasing Brady's gang 3 summers back. Never told anyone. He dismounted, immediately checking their back trail. We should be safe for a few days, long enough to figure out our next move. She walked to the pool, kneeling to cup the cool water. My mother would have loved this place. She always said water had its own intelligence, finding ways to flow even through stone. Smart woman. Jonah unsaddled the horse, movements efficient from long practice. Taught her daughter well. Maggie's smile was tinged with sadness. Not well enough to avoid becoming the town pariah. That wasn't about you. That was about fear and greed using religion as a mask. He spread his bedroll under an overhang that would shelter them from weather. I've seen it before. Different towns, same ugliness. She studied him as he worked, this quiet man who'd inserted himself into her troubles without being asked. Why did you really help me the truth now? Jonah paused, hands stilling on the saddlebags. First time I saw you at the well, surrounded by that mob, you didn't beg, didn't cry, just stood there with your chin up, dignity intact despite everything they threw at you. He met her eyes. Reminded me of those miners in Colorado, the ones who died standing up for what was right while I stood by following orders. You can't carry that guilt forever. Can't I? His laugh was bitter. 27 men. Maggie, I knew their names, their families. Jose Martinez had 6 kids. Patrick O'Brien was saving to bring his wife from Ireland. Chen Wei sent every penny home to China. I knew them, and I let them die because the company said they were troublemakers. She rose, crossing to him. You're not that man anymore. No, then who am I? The man who stood between me and a mob, who exposed Pike's lies, who risked everything for people who'd branded him a killer. She touched his face gently. The man I trust with my life. He caught her hand, holding it against his cheek. I don't deserve that trust. My mother used to say deserving had nothing to do with grace. It comes when it comes. Usually when we need it most. Thunder rumbled in the distance. They both looked up to see clouds building over the mountains, not the violent storm that had destroyed the dam, but the gentler rains that would green the desert. We should set up better shelter, Jonah said, but he didn't release her hand. Rain's coming. They worked together, stretching canvas between trees, gathering firewood, creating a small home in the wilderness. As the first drops began to fall, they huddled under their makeshift roof, sharing dried beef and hard biscuits from Jonah's supplies. What will you do when it's safe? He asked. Rebuild in Redemption Gulch. If they'll have me, the town needs healing not just from the flood, but from years of poison Pike poured into it. She pulled out her mother's journal, running fingers over the worn leather. These water sources could mean the difference between thriving and merely surviving. They'll have you, Jonah said firmly. Saw how folks looked at you during the flood. When the real crisis came, they knew who to follow. Some did, others, she shrugged. Fear runs deep. So does prejudice. The rain intensified, drumming on their canvas roof. In the growing darkness, they built a small fire, careful to keep the smoke minimal. The flames cast dancing shadows on the canyon walls. Tell me about her. Jonah said, Your mother. Maggie's face softened. Esperanza Vega was formidable, barely 5 feet tall, but she could stare down a mountain cat. The sisters at the convent in Santa Fe taught her herbs and healing, but the water knowledge came from the Mescalero elders. How did she end up here? Following love. Like a fool, her words. My father was Thomas Kelly, an Irish surveyor mapping water routes for the railroad. Charming, she said, full of dreams about bringing water to the desert. Her voice hardened. Also married, which he forgot to mention until she was pregnant with me. He abandoned you both. Worse, tried to buy her silence. When that failed, he simply left, went back east to his real family. She poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling. My mother could have been bitter. Instead, she said I was her blessing wearing disguise, raised me to be strong, independent, to never need a man's permission to exist. She succeeded, Jonah observed. Did she? I'm hiding in a canyon because men decided I was a threat. Frustration colored her tone. All I wanted was to help people, use the gifts she taught me. Instead, I became a convenient scapegoat. That's not all you became. When she looked at him questioningly, he continued, You became the woman who saved children during the flood, who faced down a mob with grace, who even tried to save Coldwater after everything he did. He shifted closer to her. You became someone worth fighting for. The firelight caught the green of her eyes, turning them into emeralds. Careful, Mr. Hale. That almost sounded like a declaration. Maybe it was. She leaned into him, and suddenly the space between them evaporated. Their lips met, gentle at first, then with growing passion. When they finally parted, both were breathless. This complicates things, she murmured. Everything's already complicated. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, fingers lingering on her cheek. Might as well add something good to the mix. She laughed, the sound like water over stones, practical romance, very Western. They talked through the night, sharing stories and silences with equal comfort. Maggie told him about growing up marked as different, the Mexican girl with the Irish name and the witch for a mother, how she'd learned to read people's fear, navigate their suspicions, find the few who saw beyond superstition. Jonah spoke of his childhood in Missouri, his father's death in the war, drifting west seeking purpose and finding only violence. How the Pinkerton badge had seemed like honor until he learned it was just another gun for hire. We're both orphans, Maggie observed as dawn approached. Cut loose from our moorings. Maybe that's why we recognize each other, Jonah suggested. 2 pieces of driftwood in the same current. The rain had stopped, leaving the desert washed clean. They ventured out to refill water containers and check for signs of pursuit. The canyon remained their secret, but Jonah spotted dust clouds to the south riders searching. We can't stay here forever, Maggie said. 3 more days. Let them tire themselves out. He studied the horizon. Then we circle back, approach the town from the north. By then, folks will have started organizing. They'll need your water knowledge. Our knowledge, she corrected. I'm not going back alone. That afternoon, they were surprised by voices echoing up the canyon. Jonah drew his gun, pushing Maggie behind him, but the voices resolved into familiar tones. Zeke and Deputy Cole, leading a small party. Don't shoot, amigo, Zeke called. We come in peace. They emerged cautiously. With Zeke and Cole were Doc Pembry, Nettie Ross, and, surprisingly, a young German couple Jonah didn't recognize. How did you find us? Jonah demanded. Zeke tracked you, Cole admitted. Said you'd shown him this place once. We were careful nobody followed us. What's happened? Maggie asked. The town. Organizing. Doc Pembry said. Hutchins sobered up enough to call a real town meeting. Without Pike's money and guns. Folks are finding their voices again. And their conscience, Nettie added. Harriet Dalton's been telling everyone how you tried to save Coldwater, how you risked yourself for others during the flood. What about Luther's men? Jonah asked. Scattered like coyotes when the payroll dried up, Cole reported. A few made threats, but most just want to find work elsewhere. The threats passing. The German couple stepped forward nervously. The woman held a baby. The man clutched a worn hat. This is Friedrich and Greta Muller. Doc Pembry explained, Tell them what you told us. Friedrich's English was accented but clear. We come over mountains, 3 days, no water, baby sick. Then we find woman in desert. He gestured to Maggie. You give us water, medicine, save our little hands. Maggie frowned. I don't. 2 months passed, Greta interrupted. Before the troubles, you ask nothing, just help. We try to pay. You refuse. Tears rolled down her weathered cheeks. They say you are witch. We say no, you are angel. We're not the only ones, Cole said. Tom Morrison's been telling everyone how you saved his kids from fever. The Martinez family, the Changs, even some of Pike's former workers, they're all speaking up about times you helped them. The tide's turning, Doc Pembry said with satisfaction. Town needs healing, needs its healer. Maggie looked overwhelmed. Jonah took her hand, squeezing gently. What about the water? He asked. Pike's Dam is gone. That's why we need the journal. Doc said, the old waterways your mother documented. With those, we can build something sustainable. No more hoarding, no more using thirst as power. It won't be easy, Maggie warned. The knowledge is there, but applying it will take work, cooperation, trust. All things in short supply before, Nettie observed. But disasters have a way of clarifying what matters. Water matters, community matters. The rest is just pride and foolishness. They spent the afternoon planning. Doc Pembry and Maggie pored over the journal, mapping water sources. Cole outlined the legal framework for a new town charter. Zeke and Jonah discussed security, not the bullying force Pike had employed, but real protection for all citizens. As sunset approached, the rescue party prepared to leave. 2 more days, Doc advised. Let the dust settle completely, then come home. Home, Maggie repeated softly after they'd gone. Strange to think of it that way after everything. Place isn't home, Jonah said. Your people are finally seeing clearly. That night, another storm rolled through. They lay together under their canvas shelter, listening to rain and sharing warmth. No lines were crossed, both too aware of the weight of the moment, but intimacy grew in the quiet spaces between words. I never thanked you, Maggie said into the darkness. For what? For seeing me. Not the witch, not the healer, not the tragic daughter of scandal. Just me. He pulled her closer. First time I saw you, that's all I could see. Beautiful woman standing strong against ugliness. Everything else was just noise. She was a beauty, Maggie quoted softly. You said that before. Meant it then, mean it more now. Lightning illuminated the canyon briefly, showing the walls that protected them, the water that sustained them, the shelter they'd built together. A metaphor too obvious to voice but too powerful to ignore. On their last morning in Arroyo Seco, they performed a small ritual. Maggie planted seeds from her mother's garden near the spring medicinal herbs that would grow wild and free. Jonah carved their initials into a cottonwood trunk, marking their sanctuary. We'll come back, Maggie said. When town life gets too heavy, this can be our retreat. Our secret garden. Our reminder, she corrected. That 2 people can build something good even when the world's against them. They rode back toward Redemption Gulch as the sun climbed high. No longer fugitives, but partners. The town sprawled before them, half ruined but stirring with new life. Canvas tents had sprouted among the surviving buildings. People worked together, clearing debris and marking foundations. Someone spotted them and shouted. Soon a crowd gathered, not hostile but hopeful. Hands reached up to help them dismount. Voices called, "Welcome." Mayor Hutchins approached, looking haggard but sober. Miss Vega, Mr. Hale. The town council, the real council, would like to speak with you both. About what? Jonah asked warily. The future, Hutchins said simply. We've got water to find and a town to rebuild. We need people who understand both justice and mercy. Will you help us? Maggie looked at Jonah, a question in her eyes. He nodded slightly wherever she went. He would follow. We'll help, she said, on condition that the water belongs to everyone. No hoarding, no special privileges. As my mother promised water for all who thirst. Agreed. Hutchins said immediately. Anything else? Yes. Maggie's voice grew firm. No more witch hunts. No more using fear to divide us. We've seen where that leads. Also agreed. The mayor's voice cracked with emotion. Miss Vega Maggie, I'm sorry. For everything. Your mother was a good woman. You are too. We lost our way. Then let's find it again, she said gently. Together. As the crowd dispersed to spread the news, Jonah and Maggie stood looking over their broken, hopeful town. The work ahead was monumental. Trust would take time to rebuild, but water was already finding new channels through the desert. And sometimes that was enough to start. "No second thoughts?" Maggie asked. "None." Jonah took her hand openly, publicly, declaring his choice for all to see. "This is where I stand, with you, with them, with what's right." She smiled, that transformative expression that had first caught his attention. "Then let's get to work, partner." They walked into town together, toward the future they would build with their own hands, guided by the wisdom of water that always finds its way. The storm hit with the fury of God's own wrath. Lightning split the purple-black sky as rain hammered down in sheets, turning the earth to mud within minutes. At the remains of Devil's Spine Dam, nature was about to finish what human greed had started. Jonah fought his way up the treacherous path, boots slipping on wet stone. Behind him, Zeke and Deputy Cole struggled with coils of rope and emergency supplies. Above, at the dam's emergency valve station, Luther Pike and 6 armed men had barricaded themselves in defiance of the evacuation order. "This is madness," Cole shouted over the wind. "The whole structure could go any minute." "That's why we need to open those valves," Jonah replied. "Channel the water down the old spillways instead of letting it burst through all at once." They'd known this moment would come. Doc Pembry's calculations had been precise. The damaged dam would hold until the first major storm. Then catastrophic failure was inevitable. The town had prepared, moved to higher ground. But if the dam burst suddenly instead of releasing pressure gradually, even the high ground wouldn't be safe. "There," Zeke pointed through the rain. "The maintenance shed." They took cover, checking their weapons. Water cascaded over the dam's crest in a solid sheet. The reservoir behind swollen beyond capacity. Cracks spider-webbed across the eastern face, widening visibly. "Luther," Jonah called out. "You need to evacuate now." Gunfire answered him, bullets sparking off rocks. Luther's voice carried over the storm, high and crazed. "This is Pike property, my brother's legacy. I'll die before I let you thieves take it." "You'll die anyway if you stay there," Cole tried. "Please, Luther, think." "I am thinking how you all turned on us, how that witch poisoned the town against us. More shots, wild and desperate. Well, if Pike's empire falls, the town falls with it." Jonah's blood ran cold. Luther wasn't just making a stand, he was actively preventing them from opening the emergency valves. He wanted the dam to fail catastrophically. "He's lost his mind," Zeke said. Grief and hate ate what little sense he had. Down in the valley, lanterns flickered like fireflies as the evacuation continued. Wagons struggled through deepening mud. Children cried as parents carried them to safety. And at the medical tent, Jonah knew Maggie was working frantically to help those injured in the chaos. "We can't wait," he decided. "Zeke, can you get to the manual release on the west side?" "If they don't shoot me first." "I'll give you cover. Cole, we need someone at the base to guide folks if the water redirects." The deputy looked torn. "My job is here." "Your job is protecting people. Go." Cole nodded and started back down. Jonah checked his rifle, meeting Zeke's eyes. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be, amigo." They burst from cover simultaneously. Jonah laying down suppressing fire while Zeke sprinted for the western valve station. Luther's men responded. Muzzle flashes bright in the darkness. Jonah felt a bullet tug at his sleeve as he dove behind a concrete barrier. The dam groaned a deep, grinding sound that vibrated through the ground. A chunk of limestone the size of a wagon broke free, tumbling into the churning water below. "The whole thing's going," someone screamed. Zeke had reached the valve wheel and was straining against it. Rust and years of Pike's neglect had seized the mechanism. Jonah rose to give more covering fire, then saw Luther himself emerging from the control shed, rifle aimed at Zeke. Time slowed. Jonah swung his weapon around, knowing he was too far, too late. Thunder crashed overhead, and in the lightning's glare, he saw Luther's face twisted with insane fury, finger tightening on the trigger. Then Luther jerked, spun, and fell. Behind him stood one of his own men, Martinez. Jonah recognized, one of the Mexican miners Pike had always treated as expendable. "Enough," Martinez shouted to the others. "You want to die for a dead man's pride? Our families are down there." The spell broke. Luther's remaining men threw down their weapons, rushing to help with the valves. Together, they strained against the wheels, muscles standing out like rope as the mechanism slowly turned. With a shriek of metal, the first valve opened. Water exploded through the spillway, a controlled torrent racing down prepared channels. The second valve followed, then the third. The pressure on the dam's face visibly decreased, though it still trembled ominously. "It's working," Zeke yelled. "But we need to—" The eastern section collapsed. Not all at once, a series of failures cascading like dominoes. Concrete crumbled. Steel reinforcements snapped like twigs. The reservoir, freed from one side of its prison, lunged for freedom. "Run!" Jonah grabbed Zeke, hauling him away from the collapsing structure. They sprinted along the ridge, chunks of dam falling around them like artillery shells. Behind them, millions of gallons of water roared through the breach. But the opened valves had done their job. Instead of a single devastating wall of water, the flood spread into multiple channels. The ancient watercourses Maggie's mother had documented in her journal, dry for years under Pike's control, suddenly ran full again. They reached the emergency rally point to find chaos transforming into purpose. Cole had organized bucket brigades and sand barriers. Doc Pembry directed medical efforts. And in the middle of it all, Maggie worked with calm efficiency, her clothes soaked and muddy, her face streaked with rain. She looked up as Jonah approached, relief flooding her features. "Thank God. When we heard the collapse—" He pulled her close, not caring who saw. "We got the valves open in time. The water's spreading through the old channels. The town should be safe." "Luther—" "Shot by his own man. Martinez saved Zeke's life." She closed her eyes briefly. What a waste, all of it. So much destruction for nothing. "Not nothing," Doc Pembry interrupted, limping over. "Look." He pointed to where the floodwaters were already receding into their new courses. In the lightning flashes, they could see streams flowing where none had been for years, filling pools and basins according to the ancient pattern. "Your mother's map," Pembry told Maggie. "The water's following it exactly. Those old channels, they're perfect, better than anything Pike ever built." "The Mescalero knew," Maggie said softly. "They understood how to work with the desert, not against it. Through the rest of that terrible night, they battled to save what they could. The lower town was gone, but the evacuation had been successful, no lives lost except Luther's." As dawn broke gray and watery, the full scope of change became visible. Devil's Spine Dam was a ruin, its remains scattered like broken teeth. But where Pike's monopoly had created scarcity, nature had restored abundance. Streams ran in a dozen directions, pools formed in natural basins. The desert, so long denied, drank deep. "It's a miracle," someone said. "It's justice," another countered. At the emergency town meeting that afternoon, held in a barn on high ground, decisions came quickly. The old town site would be abandoned. The new settlement would be built according to the water's natural flow, not in defiance of it. "We need leadership," Mayor Hutchins said, his newfound sobriety lending him unexpected dignity. "I propose a council, 5 members, elected fairly. I nominate Maggie Vega." Harriet Dalton stood, chin high despite the whispers. She kept her head during the crisis. Her knowledge saved us. "I second," called out Tom Morrison. "My kids are alive because of her." "And Jonah Hale," Martinez added, still bearing mud from the dam. "He risked everything to save the town. I'm no politician, Jonah protested. Exactly why we need you, Doc Pembry said. We've had enough of politicians. The vote was swift and unanimous, along with Doc Pembry, Cole Arnett, and surprisingly, Nettie Ross. They would guide Redemption Gulch, or whatever the new town would be called, into its future. That evening, as the rain finally ceased, Jonah found Maggie at one of the new streams. She knelt at its edge, hands in the water, tears on her cheeks. What's wrong?
Nothing. Everything.
She looked up at him.
My mother dreamed of this.
Water flowing freely, the old ways restored. She died protecting this knowledge. And now, she gestured at the transformed landscape.
Now it's real.
She'd be proud.
I hope so.
Maggie stood, wiping her eyes.
I just wish she could see it.
Maybe she can, Jonah said.
Through you.
Through what you've built on her foundation. They stood together, watching the water run, clear and free. In the distance, people were already making plans where to build, how to share the water resources, what kind of town they wanted to create.
No more secrets, Maggie said. The journal goes to the town archives. Everyone should know how to find and channel water. No one person should have that power again.
Generous. Practical. Secrets create fear. Fear creates hate. We've had enough of both. Zeke approached, leading several horses. Sorry to interrupt, but we've got company coming. Riders from Santa Fe. Look official. The territorial government had finally taken notice. 3 men in dark suits, looking uncomfortable on horseback, were picking their way through the muddy approach. Mr. Hail Miss Vega. The leader dismounted, producing documents. I'm James Crawford, Territorial Administrator. We've had reports of significant destruction here. Also significant corruption, Cole added, hand resting on his gun. Hope you're not here to continue Pike's arrangements. Crawford's face tightened. Quite the opposite. The governor has been aware of irregularities in this region. Mr. Pike's death and the dam's failure provide an opportunity for proper oversight. Meaning, Jonah asked. Meaning the territory is prepared to recognize the new town charter, validate all pre-existing water claims, including those documented in the Vega Journal, and provide funds for rebuilding. He paused. In exchange for certain commitments, such as law and order, proper tax collection, and He looked directly at Jonah. Someone with federal experience to serve as interim sheriff until proper elections can be held. I'm no lawman, Jonah said. Your Pinkerton record says otherwise. Yes, we know about Colorado. We also know you've spent 3 years trying to atone for it. Crawford's expression softened slightly. The territory needs men who understand the cost of their choices. Will you consider it? Jonah looked at Maggie, who nodded slightly. I'll consider it, but any law here gets enforced fairly. No favoritism, no persecution. That's all we ask. As the officials departed with promises to return within the week, the survivors of Redemption Gulch gathered around their new leaders. Plans were made, responsibilities assigned, hope kindled from the ashes of the old. We need a new name, someone suggested. Redemption Gulch died with the flood. Names flew New Hope, Phoenix Springs, Liberation. But it was old Martinez who provided the winner. Agua Libre, he said. Free water, in honor of the woman who kept the secret and the daughter who shared it. The vote was unanimous. That night, there was no celebration, too much work ahead, too many losses to mourn. But there was something better purpose, common purpose, shared equally. Jonah and Maggie walked the new waterways by moonlight, planning where to put the medical clinic, the school, the new town hall, where her mother's garden would be replanted, larger than before. No regrets, she asked.
About what?
You could leave. Start fresh somewhere without the baggage. Colorado and here. He stopped walking.
turned her to face him. I spent 3 years running from who I was. Here, I finally figured out who I could be. He touched her face gently. Besides, someone once told me she was a beauty, even when the whole town called her a devil. I couldn't help pulling her close. The town doesn't call me that anymore, she reminded him, smiling. No, now they call you founder, leader, healer. He pulled her into his arms. I still just call you beautiful. They kissed beside the free-flowing water, while overhead the clouds parted to reveal stars. The storm had passed, leaving the desert washed and ready for new growth. In the ruins of the old dam, Luther Pike's body was found the next day, along with a hidden cache of gold wealth hoarded while the town thirsted. The money went into the rebuilding fund. Final irony from a man who'd valued gold over water. But that was the past. The future flowed in new channels now, carved by justice instead of greed, guided by wisdom instead of fear. And at its heart, a scarred young woman and a haunted gunman worked to build something worth keeping. Agua Libre. Free water. Free people. Free to become what Redemption Gulch never could be, a true community, where every soul mattered and every thirst was quenched. The desert bloomed, and with it, hope. The morning sun cast long shadows across the temporary courthouse, a converted barn that still smelled of hay despite its new purpose. Inside, the citizens of newly christened Agua Libre packed the makeshift gallery, fans fluttering against the heat. At the defendant's table sat Silas Pike, miraculously alive but badly injured. Flanked by a lawyer brought in from Santa Fe, Jonah adjusted his sheriff's badge, still uncomfortable with its weight. Beside him, Maggie organized medical reports that would serve as evidence. 3 weeks had passed since the dam's collapse, and the town had voted to hold a proper trial, not the kangaroo court Pike had orchestrated against Maggie, but real justice. All rise, Deputy Cole announced. The Honorable Judge William Thornberry presiding. Thornberry, sent by the territorial government, was a small man with keen eyes that missed nothing. He settled behind the improvised bench planks laid across sawhorses and surveyed the room. We're here to address multiple charges against Silas Pike, including fraud, conspiracy, and murder. He peered over his spectacles. Mr. Pike, how do you plead? Pike's lawyer, a slick man named Pemberton, stood. Not guilty on all counts. Your Honor, my client was a businessman operating within the law. A ripple of anger went through the crowd. Thornberry's gavel cracked down. I'll have order, or I'll clear this courtroom. The territorial prosecutor, Maria Santos, one of the few female lawyers in the territory, rose with quiet authority. Your Honor, the people will prove that Silas Pike systematically defrauded this community, orchestrated violence against its citizens, and was responsible for the death of Esperanza Vega. Objection! Pemberton shot up. That death was ruled accidental. By a sheriff in Pike's employ, Santos countered. We have new evidence. Proceed. Thornberry ruled. The first witness was Doc Pembry, who testified about the dam's structural flaws. I examined the engineering reports. Pike knew the eastern buttress was failing. He concealed this while restricting water flow to drive up prices. Did Mr. Pike ever discuss these concerns with you? Santos asked. He told me to mind my medical business and leave water management to him. Pembry's voice hardened. Said if I kept talking, I might find my medical supplies hard to come by. Next came Martinez, the miner who'd shot Luther. His testimony was devastating payments to false witnesses, orders to contaminate wells to increase dependency on Pike's water, threats against anyone who questioned the operation. I'm not proud of what I did, Martinez said, hands clasped tight. But when you have family to feed and only one man controls the water. He looked directly at Pike. You do things that shame you. And the night Esperanza Vega died, Santos prompted. I wasn't there, but I heard Luther bragging, said he'd solved the Mexican problem permanently. Martinez's voice dropped. Said she'd never see the blow coming. Pike lurched to his feet. Lies all lies. Sit down, Mr. Pike, Judge Thornberry ordered. You'll have your chance. The morning progressed with witness after witness. Miners testified about price gouging. Farmers spoke of wells mysteriously going dry after refusing Pike's buyout offers. Even Harriet Dalton took the stand, admitting she'd been pressured to shun the Vegas or lose her husband's bank loan. Then came the moment everyone had waited for. The prosecution calls Magdalena Vega. Maggie walked to the witness stand with quiet dignity. She wore her mother's blue shawl, the one she'd hidden during the worst persecution after being sworn in. She met Pike's glare without flinching. Miss Vega, Santos began gently. Tell us about the night your mother died. I was at the Morrison farm, delivering their third child. A difficult birth. I was gone all night. Maggie's voice remained steady. When I returned at dawn, I found her by the old channels. Her skull was damaged. Horse tracks led away, but the sheriff said the wind had blown rocks from the cliff above. Did you believe that explanation? No. The tracks were clear-shod horses, not wild ones, and the blood pattern. She paused, composing herself. I've seen enough injuries to know the difference between falling rocks and a deliberate blow. Objection, Pemberton called. The witness is not qualified. Miss Vega has delivered over 100 babies and treated countless injuries. Santos interrupted. I'd say she's qualified to recognize trauma. Overruled. Thornberry said, Continue. Why didn't you report your suspicions? Santos asked. Maggie's laugh was bitter. To whom Sheriff Brady was Pike's man. The mayor owed Pike money, who would listen to the young woman already called witch. So you stayed silent. I stayed watchful, and I protected what my mother died for the knowledge of the old waterways. She produced the journal. This contains decades of information about natural springs, underground channels, seasonal flows. My mother believed water belonged to everyone. Pike killed her for that belief. The cross-examination was brutal. Pemberton attacked her reputation, her mixed heritage, the superstitions surrounding her. But Maggie weathered each assault with calm responses, never losing composure. Isn't it true you publicly threatened Mr. Pike after your mother's death? I told him the truth would flow like water, finding its way despite obstacles. That sounds like a threat. It sounds like a promise, one I've kept. When Maggie stepped down, Jonah caught her hand briefly. The small gesture didn't go unnoticed. Several jury members smiled. The defense's case was weak. Pike's witnesses were clearly bought or intimidated, their testimony contradicting known facts. When Pike himself took the stand, his arrogance proved his undoing. This town was nothing before me, he declared. I brought industry, organization, prosperity. You brought thirst and fear. Santos countered. You turned water into a weapon. I turned chaos into order. These people, he gestured dismissively at the gallery, they're sheep. They need leadership. So you decided what they needed, who lived or died. I decided who deserved water based on their contribution to society. Pike's mask finally slipped completely. Why should productive citizens subsidize parasites? The Mexicans, the Chinese, that witch and her mother, they contributed nothing. Esperanza Vega saved dozens of lives with her medical knowledge. Pagan nonsense. She defied the natural order. Women like that, mixing their blood, practicing their foreign ways. He caught himself too late. So you eliminated her? I eliminated an obstacle to progress. The courtroom erupted. Even Pemberton looked defeated. Judge Thornberry gavelled repeatedly for order. Mr. Pike, he said when quiet returned. Are you confessing to murder? Pike's face went white as he realized what he'd said. I know. I meant... No further questions, Santos said. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. When they filed back, their faces were grim but determined.
On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of murder in the death of Esperanza Vega, we find the defendant guilty. Pike sagged in his chair. Pemberton requested leniency based on his client's contributions to the town's development, but Thornberry was unmoved.
Silas Pike, you corrupted the very foundations of civilization, fair dealing, equal justice, and the sanctity of life. You turned necessity into commodity and wielded it like a tyrant.
He paused. I sentence you to hang by the neck until dead. Sentence to be carried out in 30 days.
No. Pike struggled as deputies moved to restrain him. You can't. I own this town. I made it.
You tried to own it, Thornberry corrected. But water, like justice, finds its own level in the end. As Pike was led away, still protesting, the courtroom slowly emptied. Citizens walked into bright sunshine, many wiping tears of relief, of vindication, of grief for years lost to fear. It's over, Cole said, badge glinting in the light.
Really over?
The Pike part is. Jonah agreed. Now comes the harder work building something better. That evening, the town council met in their temporary headquarters. Maps covered every surface, showing proposed building sites, water distribution systems, and agricultural zones. The Vega Journal lay open, its secrets now public knowledge.
We need to establish water rights clearly, Doc Pembry said. Every household gets a base allocation, additional needs evaluated case by case.
The old channels can irrigate at least 300 acres, Maggie added, tracing routes on the map. If we're smart about crop rotation and selection, we could be self-sufficient within 2 years, Nettie finished. No more depending on supply wagons that might never come. They worked late into the night, planning a town that would be the opposite of Pike's Kingdom. Democratic, fair, sustainable. What about defense? Cole asked eventually. Word of free water will draw folks, not all of them good. We'll need a proper militia. Jonah said, trained, regulated, answerable to the council. No more private armies. You'll train them, Maggie asked. If that's what's needed. He met her eyes. I'm done running from who I was. Time to use those skills for something worthwhile. A week later, they held the execution at dawn. Pike had spent his last days alternating between rage and pleading, offering hidden gold for his freedom. None listened. On the scaffold, offered last words. He remained defiant. You'll regret this without me. This town will dry up and blow away. Maggie stepped forward from the crowd. My mother's last words were about forgiveness. She said hate was like drinking poison and expecting others to die. She looked up at Pike. I forgive you, Silas Pike. Not for your sake, but for mine. Your chains don't need to bind us anymore. Pike's face contorted. I don't want your forgiveness. Which? Nevertheless, you have it. She stepped back into Jonah's arms. The lever was pulled. Pike dropped, and with him, an era ended. The real Reverend Paul Fletcher arrived the next week. Coldwater had been a fraud, never ordained. His credentials forged like everything else in Pike's regime. Fletcher was young, earnest, and his first sermon was about the woman at the well. Christ offered living water to the outcast, he said, looking directly at Maggie. Not because she earned it, but because she thirsted. That's our calling, to share the water of life with all who need it. Slowly, the town took shape. Adobe buildings rose along the new main street. The medical clinic opened with Maggie training assistants. Jonah's militia protected without oppressing. The council met weekly. Meetings public. Decisions transparent. There were setbacks. A group of Pike loyalists tried to dynamite one of the new channels but were caught by alert citizens. A drought tested their water management. But the old ways proved true. There was enough if shared wisely. And there were triumphs. The first harvest from the irrigated fields, the first baby born in free agua libre, delivered by Maggie, named Hope by her grateful parents. the day the territorial legislature officially recognized their charter.
You know what today is? Maggie asked one evening. 6 months after the trial. They sat by one of the flowing channels, watching sunset paint the desert gold.
Tuesday,
she laughed. The anniversary. 1 year since you stood between me and that mob at the well. Seems longer. So much has changed. Everything's changed.
She leaned against him.
I never thanked you properly. For what? For seeing me clearly when everyone else saw only what they feared. For believing I was worth defending.
He turned to face her fully.
She was a beauty even when the whole town called her a devil. I couldn't help pulling her close.
He touched her scarred cheek gently.
Still can't help it. Never will. The town doesn't call me that anymore,
she reminded him,
as had become their ritual.
No, now they call you councilwoman, teacher, healer.
He smiled.
I still just call you mine. Yours. If you'll have me, officially. Reverend Fletcher's been practicing his wedding ceremonies.
She stared at him, green eyes wide. Jonah Hale, is that a proposal?
It's a question. Will you marry a reformed gunman who's trying to be a decent sheriff? Will you marry a former witch who can't stop healing people? Every day and twice on Sundays.
She kissed him as the first stars appeared. Around them,
Agua Libre settled into evening families gathering for dinner, children playing in the plaza, water running freely through channels old and new. The execution of Silas Pike hadn't just ended a tyrant's reign. It had killed the fear that let tyranny flourish. In its place grew something rarer than water in the desert, a community that chose justice over judgment, courage over comfort, hope over hate. The transformation wasn't complete, might never be complete, but it was begun. And that was enough. In the council office, the Vega Journal rested in a glass case, open to a page where Esperanza had written, "Water remembers every path it's ever taken. Block one way, it finds another. Truth is like water patient, persistent, ultimately unstoppable." Her daughter had proved her right, and in the free-flowing channels of Agua Libre, her legacy lived on. 1 year later, Agua Libre had transformed from a desperate refugee camp into a thriving desert town. Adobe buildings lined streets, planned according to water flow rather than rigid grids. Gardens flourished behind every home. The sound of children laughing replaced the old sounds of argument over water rations. Jonah stood on the ridge overlooking it all, badge glinting in the morning sun. Beside him, Maggie adjusted the medical bag she now carried everywhere, a wedding gift from Doc Pembry when she'd officially become his partner in the clinic.
Hard to believe, she said, that a year ago this was all mud and desperation.
You sound like your mother, he said, wrapping an arm around her waist. She wrote something similar in the journal about how quickly the desert blooms when water returns. They'd been married 3 months now, a ceremony that brought the whole town together. Even former enemies had attended. Harriet Dalton had made Maggie's wedding dress, insisting it was the least she could do after years of cruelty. "Sheriff Hale," a voice called from below. Young Tommy Morrison came running, the boy Maggie had saved from fever, now grown tall and strong. "Riders coming, lots of them." Jonah's hand moved instinctively to his gun, old habits dying hard. But as the dust cloud resolved into individual riders, he relaxed. These weren't raiders or claim jumpers, they were families. Wagons loaded with possessions, faces hopeful rather than hostile. Word had spread across the territory. Agua Libre welcomed all who came in peace, shared water freely, judged people by their character rather than their origins. The trickle of new arrivals had become a steady stream.
30 wagons at least,
Maggie observed. "We'll need to expand the temporary quarters again. Cole's already on it," Jonah said. "Got a crew laying out plots in the eastern section." They descended to meet the newcomers. At the lead rode a weathered man who introduced himself as Samuel Carson, lately of Kansas. "Heard you folks figured out how to live with the desert instead of fighting it." Carson said, "We're farmers.
burnt out by drought back home, looking for a fresh start. Then you've come to the right place, Maggie said. Welcome to Agua Libre. First thing, let's get your people and animals watered. The integration process had become routine but never impersonal. Each family was assigned a mentor from the established residents. Water rights were explained, everyone got enough for drinking and basic needs. Agricultural water allocated based on acreage and crops. The old mescalero wisdom was shared freely, which plants thrived with little water. How to read the seasonal patterns, where to dig wells that wouldn't interfere with the flowing channels. That afternoon, while Maggie tended to the medical screening of newcomers, Jonah met with the town council. The cramped office had been replaced by a proper council chamber, its walls decorated with maps showing the ever-expanding network of water channels. Railroad's definitely coming, Doc Pembry reported. Surveyor was through last week. Says the Southern Pacific wants to run a spur line to Agua Libre. Because of the water? Nettie asked. Partly, but also because we're stable. No range wars, no vigilante justice. They can count on law and order here. Pembry nodded to Jonah. Your reputation helps. Former Pinkerton who went straight carries weight with the money men. Double-edged sword, Jonah replied. Railroad brings prosperity, but also problems. We've all seen what happens to towns when the railroad barons move in, which is why we need to prepare, Cole said. He'd grown into his role as chief deputy, no longer the uncertain young man who'd struggled between conscience and survival. I propose we codify our water charter into territorial law before they arrive. Make it ironclad water rights tied to residency, not ownership, can't be bought, sold, or monopolized. Motion seconded, said Maria Santos, who'd moved to Agua Libre after prosecuting Pike. She'd become their legal advisor, ensuring every decision could withstand challenge. The vote was unanimous. They'd learned from Pike's example never again would one person control what all needed to survive. That evening, the town gathered for its monthly celebration. These had begun as simple potlucks, but evolved into festivals that showcased Agua Libre's growing diversity. Mexican guitars played alongside Irish fiddles. Chinese lanterns hung next to Navajo weaving. Children of all backgrounds played together while their parents shared food and stories. Jonah found Zeke by the barbecue pit. Turning beef donated by the Circle H Ranch, the vaquero had married his sweetheart, Sarah Yazzie, a dine weaver whose work now decorated many homes in town. You ever miss the old days? Zeke asked. Just you, me, and the cattle. Sometimes. Jonah admitted, simpler then, but not better. Zeke finished. I know. Sarah's pregnant. Doc Maggie says everything looks good. Congratulations, brother. They clasped hands. Two men who'd ridden through hell together and found something worth building on the other side. As night fell, lanterns were lit throughout the plaza. Reverend Fletcher led a brief blessing that honored all faiths he'd learned from Coldwater's poisonous example that true ministry united rather than divided. Water of life, he said, flowing freely to all who thirst. May we never forget the price paid for this freedom. May we never again let fear divide us. Amen. The crowd responded, a word that transcended any single religion. Later, Jonah and Maggie walked the water channels, their nightly ritual. The sound of flowing water had become Agua Libre's heartbeat constant, reassuring, life-giving. I've been thinking, Maggie said, about expanding the clinic. With all the new families, we need more space, and I want to start a proper midwifery training program. Following your mother's footsteps, and going beyond. She kept knowledge close because she had to. We can share it openly. She paused by a pool where moonlight turned the water to silver. I want to build something that lasts. Jonah. Something Pike and men like him can never destroy because it belongs to everyone. He pulled her close. We are building it. Every day. Every choice to trust instead of fear. To share instead of hoard. It's already bigger than us. She turned in his arms to face him. Speaking of building things, she took his hand, placed it on her still flat stomach. Doc Pembry confirmed it today. 7 months from now, there'll be a new citizen of Agua Libre. Jonah stared at her, joy and terror warring on his face. We're having a baby. We're having a baby. She laughed at his expression. The notorious gunman Jonah Hale, brought low by impending fatherhood. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle before setting her down gently. Boy or girl? Too early to tell. Does it matter? Not one bit. He kissed her deeply. Though I hope they have your eyes. And your aim. Might need it if the railroad brings the kind of trouble you're worried about. They continued their walk, planning for a future that once seemed impossible. Behind them. The celebration continued, music and laughter floating on the desert air like a promise. Near the old site of Redemption Gulch, now a meadow fed by redirected water, a marker stood. It listed the names of those lost in the flood, and before including Esperanza Vega, finally given the recognition she deserved. Fresh flowers lay at its base, placed by citizens who remembered her healing hands and fierce love for justice. She would have loved this, Maggie said softly. All of it, the water flowing free, the town united, the knowledge shared. She knows, Jonah said. Through you, she knows. 3 days later, as if to test their preparedness, trouble arrived. Not the violent kind they'd feared, but bureaucratic, a delegation from the railroad company, led by a smooth-talking executive named Harrison Blackwood. Gentlemen, ladies, Blackwood addressed the packed council chamber. The Southern Pacific offers prosperity beyond your dreams. All we need is a small consideration management rights to your water resources, simply to ensure efficient distribution. You understand? The room erupted in angry voices. Jonah had to gavel repeatedly for order. Mr. Blackwood. Maria Santos stood, every inch the prosecutor. Our water charter is non-negotiable. Water rights belong to the community. Period. How quaint. Blackwood smiled. But surely you realize that without railroad cooperation, Agua Libre will remain a backwater. No markets for your crops. No supplies from the east. We survived before you, Nettie interrupted. We'll survive after. Will you? Blackwood's tone hardened. The railroad has ways of making towns reconsider. Is that a threat? Jonah asked quietly. Merely an observation. Sheriff, think carefully. We'll return in a week for your answer. After they left, the council convened an emergency session. Some worried about economic isolation. Others feared the railroad might divert around them entirely, leaving them to wither. This is Pike all over again, someone said. Different face, same greed. No, Maggie said firmly. Pike worked in shadow. This is in the open, which means we can fight it in the open. Over the following days, Maria Santos worked tirelessly, researching precedents and territorial law. Cole organized the militia not for violence, but for a show of unified resolve. And Maggie did what she did best, healed bodies and hearts, reminding people what they were fighting for. The answer, when it came, was not what anyone expected. 3 other towns along the proposed railroad route, all facing similar ultimatums, sent representatives to Agua Libre. Together, they formed the Water Commons Alliance, pooling resources and presenting a united front. When Blackwood returned, he found not a cowed town council, but a coalition. Our answer, Jonah said, standing before the packed chamber. It's no. Water is not for sale. Not here, not in Santo Tomas, not in Esperanza, not in Libertad. You want to run rails through our territory. You deal with us as equals, not subjects. Blackwood's face went through several interesting color changes. You can't possibly think. We think, Maria Santos interrupted, that the territorial governor will be very interested in our documented evidence of Southern Pacific's attempts at extortion.
We think the newspapers back east will find the story of railroad barons trying to steal water from desert communities quite compelling. We think your shareholders might question the wisdom of creating enemies where you could have had allies. In the end, business pragmatism won. The railroad came, but on the alliance's terms, fair rates, respect for local law, and absolutely no control over water resources. The spike driving ceremony became a celebration not of corporate power but of communities standing together. Agua Libre grew, but thoughtfully, new businesses opened along Main Street. The school expanded to 3 teachers. The clinic became a full hospital, with Maggie training a new generation of healers who carried forward Esperanza Vega's wisdom. And in their home, on the hill overlooking the town, as Maggie grew round with child and Jonah practiced lullabies on a guitar Zeke had given him, they often stood together watching the sunset paint the flowing water gold. "No regrets?" she asked one evening, their familiar question. "Only one," he said. She looked at him in surprise. "I wish I'd found you sooner. Wish I'd been the man you deserved from the beginning." She kissed him gently. "You were becoming him. That's what matters. My mother used to say water doesn't flow backward, only forward. We are who we are because of the journey, not in spite of it." As stars emerged in the desert sky, they could hear the sounds of their town water flowing, children playing, families gathering for evening meals. It was the sound of redemption. Not the false kind Coldwater had preached, but the real thing, a community choosing every day to be better than it was. On the wall of their home hung a framed piece of paper, the first water allocation certificate issued in Agua Libre, made out to Magdalena Vega Hale. But it wasn't a symbol of ownership. It was a promise that no one would thirst, that knowledge would be shared, that fear would never again be used as a weapon. In the desert where her mother had died protecting secrets, Maggie had built something more powerful than any dam, a community where water flowed as freely as justice, where a scarred healer and a haunted gunman had found not just love, but purpose. "She was a beauty," Jonah whispered, holding his wife as their child kicked within her. "Even when the whole town called her a devil, I couldn't help pulling her close. And I'll keep pulling her close until the desert blooms forever." "Forever's a long time," Maggie said, smiling. "Not long enough," he replied, and kissed her under the endless stars. The water sang its ancient song through new channels, and Agua Libre, free water, lived up to its name, in a land where men had killed for every drop. They had built an oasis not just of water, but of hope. And in that hope, the desert bloomed. Thank you for listening to this story. Friends, I hope the tale of Jonah and Maggie touched your heart as it did mine. Please comment below and let me know where you're listening from. I love connecting with listeners around the world and hearing your thoughts on these Wild West stories. If you enjoyed this journey to Agua Libre, please subscribe to Wild West Night, like this video, and hit that hype button to help more people discover these tales of courage, redemption, and love in the American frontier. Until next time, remember, like water in the desert, the best stories always find their way